So I'm Nick, Commercial Director of Telefonica Dynamic Insights.
And I'm Mick, excuse me, Head of Data and Technology, Exterion Media. I'm going to have a cough and cover my excuse me.
We'll just wait for him to finish that and then we'll start off, shall we? So we've kind of split the presentation into two. The first part's the really boring theory bit that I give, and the second part's the really interesting bit, which is all the results, which Mick's going to do. So to be honest, we've had two presentations this morning that have just sort of kind of really paved and clarified the way. To an extent, the mobile insights that Andrew's provided kind of take away a lot of what I was going to talk about, which is it's really good. It's really helpful because we can just reinforce the message, although it's a very different approach to the same data source. And then Jane's perspective, also quite important because we're really focusing on value. So Telefonica Dynamic Insights has been set up as a global entity of Telefonica, and we look at all the territories we've got lots of mobile data in, so Movistar in Spain, Vivo in Brazil, and O2 in the UK, and we figure out how we can create valuable insights for the marketplace. So it's not just about interesting, we're not really interested in interesting, we're interested in how we can actually help businesses make or save money using this information. So I work for the UK part of the business, so I'm talking about O2 data today, and in fact for this partnership we are talking about the O2 data source. The O2 data source has got 24 million wills in it. And those 24 million wills are going about their daily business, creating data. Now, I don't have to explain this metadata anymore because kindly Andrew's done it for me. But what I do have to explain is that we don't know who will is. It's really important. And when you talk about Minority Report as well, we're not in that world. We don't want to be creepy. Yeah. We will build data up, and we've got lots of it, but we do two things to it that are really important to avoid us being creepy and evil. Number one, and evil would be the word. Number one, we anonymize the data. The second we receive information from the operating business, we've lost the personal details associated with that individual, with the exception of age and gender. And then secondly, to be extra vigilant, we aggregate the data. So we aggregate it to a crowd level when we display the results back to any client. When the information leaves our centers, it's aggregated up to a crowd of 10. Now, the rationale for that's actually quite, it sort of comes back to Will as a great example. If Will was the only person to go to Tasmania at Christmas, then Will could be identified even though he's anonymous in our data. So therefore, Will would be discounted from our analysis. If there was 10 Wills doing the trip to Tasmania, we'd include it within the analysis. Does that make sense in terms of how we try and protect? Then finally, we work with a lot of transport businesses and they want to see a UK view or UK population. And to get to that population, we extrapolate our data. We don't just times it by 3. We have got about a third of the UK, but it's not quite the scientific way to do it. There are better ways of doing that. And what are we trying to understand? We're trying to understand basically who people are, where they're moving to, why they're moving there, where they've come from, where they're going to, and how they've actually moved around, okay? So let's talk data for 1 second. Big data has been quoted a lot today. I don't know whether we qualify. I don't know what big data really is in terms of qualification criteria, but I can just state the facts of what we've got. So we've got two core sources, mobile data itself, so the event data that Andrew was talking about earlier. That's when your phone connects to a cell tower. And that can either be active or passive. Active, I make a phone call, I send a text, I ask some data, etc., etc. Passive, the phone is just maintaining a connection as I move along. So it's maintaining a connection from cell to cell. We pick that data up as well. Or the phone loses connection, regains connection. Quite useful for the London Underground, which we'll be coming on to shortly. So that data set accounts for about 2 billion events that we use every day. And that's 2 billion events, which we then keep for a 2-year rolling window. So we've got 365 times 2 times 2 billion. So it's quite a big volume data source. And then on top of that, we've got the behavioral data that we layer on. So basically, app usage and website usage, first page website usage that we can layer on top of that as well. So we start to build, as you can see, quite a large data set that tells us lots of different things about this anonymous and aggregated crowd. So we can understand how old the crowd is. We can break it down by age. We can understand where the crowd tends to live, where the crowd tends to work. Thank you, Andrew, you've explained that one beautifully. Affluence of the crowd from things like the phone they've got, the holidays they go on. Do they go to Barbados in January? That's always a fairly good indication they've got some money. Life stage, the type of phone they've got, how digital they are with the phone, which has been particularly useful in a number of marketplaces, including retail, who are like now retailers are going through digital transformation. They want to understand how digital the population is. And various hobbies and interests, which we can obviously build up through the type of things they do on their apps, etc., etc. So lots and lots of information about who they are. And then actually, critically, which makes this rather different from traditional data, where they are with that profile. So historical data sources are very good at telling you who people are based on where they live. We're pretty good at transporting that profile with an individual, which is critical to the project that we're working with Exterion. So we understand where they go from, where they go to. We can start to break the data down by looking at patterns to understand, for example, whether someone's in a car. Because if they're in a car and they go through cell towers, it looks very different to the data when someone's on a train, because all the people on the train go through exactly the same time, and start to really sort of delve into the data to understand the mode of transport, particularly useful for the markets we go into. And just touching on that, and touching on the comments earlier about value, we've focused on what we can do well and what we can do to replace and what we can do to add value across various different verticals. So logical option is transport. Transport marketplace, we are working with a large number of transport service providers, anyone from the likes of, say, East Coast wanting to understand more about their customers, their market share versus planes, etc., through to Highways England wanting to figure out what the best time is to put roadworks in, etc., based on the flows of people from A to B. So pretty successful in that marketplace. Retail, wanting to understand how busy areas are so they can optimize opening times. What's going on in their venues in terms of profiles, how digital are people in the venues that they've got their shops, so actually should they be focusing more on digital service rather than people, etc. And then finally, and lastly but not least, the media sector. So what is the profile of people in location that helps us to, at a crowd level, be more meaningful in the messages we're providing back on targeted digital media, i.e., what's this billboard showing that's relevant to the crowd? Not, again, being really clear about the individual, but to the crowd of people there. Okay, so just to conclude my bit, the theory, and a lot of this has now been covered, we're just going to talk about a colleague of mine and sort of just, I suppose, just reinforce how we actually build the Lego bricks that support this solution. So this is a typical day for a colleague of mine. What do we know about this colleague of mine based on the data we've got? Well, we don't know. What we do know is we know their male, we know that they have a home post sector, and we know their age. We also know what type of phone they've got, and that really ends there. What we don't know critically is their name, their address, their phone number, anything that can personally re-identify that individual. They are an anonymous entity to us, and everything that we build on them then is based on behaviour. So how does that look? Well, let's look at a typical day for this colleague of mine. Okay, so a message comes into his phone, it's at a location, it's at 6 in the morning, and logically you suggest that they might be at their home location on the basis that it is 6 in the morning. This colleague then decides he's going to make a journey and goes 15 miles from one location to another, interacting with cells, not using his phone, just interacting with cells as he goes. And because of the way in which he's going through those cells, we can see that actually he is driving, not on the train. He then shows a different exhibition of the way he's interacting with the cells, and he clearly gets the train to London. Once he gets to London, he critically disappears from the network, he's gone. And then he reappears at our offices in Air Street. So that disappearance, reappearance is fundamentally the underpinnings of this project. And what we're effectively doing, and where we're rather different to the fantastic Tableau visualization, is we're not just doing it for, in this case he gave us disclosure to use him, but David, we're doing it for the anonymous population of the O2 base. So it's creating the insights across the whole of the population. Okay, so that's the theory, that's the boring bit over with. I'm going to hand you over to Mick, who's going to take you through the results of this project.
Okay, thank you. Right. Just to give you a bit of background about Exterion Media, we are Europe's largest privately owned out-of-home advertising business. And what we mean by out-of-home is assets that consumers are passing when they're out of the home, basically. So everything that you're passing through in your daily life when you leave your front door. To give you an idea of the kind of assets that we utilise, we represent about 90% of all bus advertising in the UK, everything on the outside of a bus, everything on the inside of a bus. We have assets at national rail stations, we have retail assets, the 2 Westfields in London, and of course we have the London Underground, which is what we're going to focus on today. So for our advertisers, what we have to do, we have to ensure that the right content is put in front of the right people at the right time and in the right location. And this is particularly relevant for our assets on the London Underground and our partnership with TfL. So TfL's ethos is every journey matters. Now, from TfL's perspective, that's ensuring you have first and foremost a safe journey. but also that your journey is efficient, you get from A to B in as quickly and as efficient manner as possible. Now, that actually reflects our philosophy as well. If we're to understand the audiences that we're communicating and engaging with every day, we have to have a combination of demographic, geographic, and behavioural data, but importantly, we need to overlay that on a real deep understanding of the journeys that our consumers and audiences are making every day. Now, there's a problem for us. Out of home is a very difficult medium to measure. When you think about it, you need to understand everyone, everywhere, all of the time. If we compare that, for example, to TV, TV is measured by a panel. You have 4,500 households. They have a little set-top box in their living room. It records when somebody enters the room. They hit a little button, and that will record the fact that they're watching a television programme. And then from there, extrapolated out, we can then understand the audience across the country that's watching that particular programme. Now, out of home, we've got to understand everybody moving everywhere, what assets they're engaging with, not only that they're engaging with those assets, but can they actually see those assets, how fast are they moving, and so on and so forth. So it's very difficult for us. To compound this, we're still in a position where we're using a fixed and modelled view of the world. So all the research that we use to understand the audiences that are passing by our assets is fixed, it's static. So we can only understand it in one sort of dimension. And it's also based on traditional research surveys. And really, when you look at the London Underground in particular, that's quite anachronistic. You know, it's a dynamic environment. It is changing all the time. I mean, just out of curiosity, how many people use the London Underground every day to commute to work? So, yeah, quite a large proportion of you. How many people use it during, say, the hours of 2 in the afternoon and 4 in the afternoon? Very few. So the point I'm trying to make is that it's a dynamic environment, it's constantly changing, and our view of it is kind of coloured by our own usage of it. If you were to stand in one place, in one station for an entire day, you would see all life. And, you know, I work in Camden Town, and believe me, that is definitely the case. So why is that becoming increasingly important for us? Well, firstly, online has changed clients' perceptions in terms of accountability, measurement, and return on investment. And we need to adapt and change to reflect that. Secondly, we have invested in a huge amount of digital infrastructure, digital screens. Now, there's immense flexibility that we can bring to bear with those, and we want to ensure that our clients benefit from that. And lastly, we want to ensure that all of our assets are occupied, that we maximise and generate fair price for the audiences that we're delivering on behalf of our clients. Now, again, coming back to this individual versus broadcast, we must never forget that out of home is predominantly a broadcast medium. And actually, this is very important for us. This is a key selling point because media is now becoming increasingly fragmented, although rather the audiences that we can communicate with are becoming fragmented in the way that they consume media. Now, Zone 1 provides us with that broadcast opportunity. It allows us to communicate with large amounts of people at single points in time. However, we also have many other assets in the outer zones. And for us to be able to sell them effectively, we need to understand how those audiences are using those stations. Every journey has a beginning, after all. So, we've embarked on a journey as Exterion Media, and it's a data journey. And firstly, that's to move from static to real-time data to understand audiences in real time. And secondly, the shift away from claimed behaviour to actual behaviour. And the insight provided by our partnership with Telefonica is a critical step on this journey. I'm going to skip that slide because I've just talked all about that. Right, so what I wanted to do was actually show you the outputs of the tool that we're using to actually access all of this information. So I think, you know, as Andrew was talking previously, it's important that you would be able to access that information in a clear visual manner. Let the end user actually get the insight that they need for this. So the underlying data that Telefonica have produced for us is looking at all journeys into, out of, and within Zone 1. And it was critical for us to have a flexible solution. So it was all very well having all of this data, but we wanted to be able to get our sales guys to be able to access this information, to get commercial insight, create sales collateral. And that was absolutely critical in terms of what we wanted to do. And working very closely in partnership with Telefonica, they've created a fantastic tool for us to be able to do that. And I think, again, a theme that's coming through from this is, you know, we can talk about big data, but it's the commercial, or certainly from a commercial organisation's point of view, it's the commercial value that we can generate. It's not about, I think, I have a quote here from Hetan Shah, the Executive Director of the Royal Statistical Society, and he said, the data geek community forget that people don't want data, they want answers. And I think that's, you know, critical for us. So what I want to do now is just take you through some screenshots of the tool and just talk a little bit about how we're using this data. So, first screenshot here, I was hoping to sort of maybe have a mouse or a pointer, but I don't, so I might have to sort of fly around the stage a little bit. So the first view here, what we're looking at is how we can build an audience to understand by location and time where we can find them and build a campaign on behalf of our clients. So on the left-hand side, we can define various variables in terms of the audience we're defining, so their spending power, their age, their digitality, so that's their sophistication in terms of their usage of their mobile device, and their gender. This, I should say that also this tool is still being built. We're still in the process of getting through to a final build. The extra plumbing that we're going to put in here is something I'm going to show you later, but there's also a behavioural aspect. So what are these people using their devices for? What websites are they accessing? What apps are they accessing? We'll also be able to have that there. The two bar charts are showing, once I've defined my audience, the proportion of that audience that I can see at these stations. And then the yellow chart in terms of volumes, and then the last chart is then a heat map showing when I can see this audiences at these particular stations by hour of day. So I've defined an audience now. What we've got is a fashion client. They're wanting to target females with a high digitality, so sophisticated use of their mobile devices, aged between 25 and 39 years old, and have the high and highest spending power. We've now got a list of our stations in terms of efficiency, in terms of delivering that audience, volume, and then also hour of day when I can see them. What we would then do from a campaign planning perspective is we would select our stations in terms of volume, and then you can see on the right-hand side now, we can start to begin to understand where we're seeing this particular audience at hours of the day. So from a digital asset point of view, we can ensure that we're putting up the right message at the right time in front of the right audience. And then secondly, we want to look at it in terms of efficiency as well. So we just don't want to just focus on the volume. We want to ensure that our clients' money is being spent most efficiently. So again, we can start to see a move from, we've got Oxford Circus, King's Cross, St Pancras, all the large volume stations you'd expect to see delivering volume. But in terms of efficiency, you're starting to see, I think, probably as you'd expect from this kind of audience, High Street, Kensington, Notting Hill Gate, Vauxhall, Sloane Square, and so on. So effectively what we've done here, we've built a traditional campaign, putting up, sort of traditional paper, what we would call paper and paste assets, but also we can start to optimise our clients' spend in terms of their digital campaign. The next series of slides I'm going to show you is really looking at how we can understand stations or groups of stations in detail in terms of their usage. So again, this is important for us in terms of understanding context and mindset. So what is the right messaging to put out depending on the mission perhaps that people are on when they're using these stations. So I'm going to compare two stations here. We've got King's Cross, St Pancras, and what we're looking at is the volume of usage by hour of day. So you've got the two clear peaks for the commuting time between 7 and 8, and I'm going to move along to this side because I know I'm concentrating on you a lot, so I'm going to move over here. Between 7 and 8 and 5 and 7 o'clock. And then what we can also then see is the red and the green is people arriving and people departing. So you can see again, you've got a fairly flat kind of view because it's a terminus. You've got people who are actually getting onto mainline rail stations. If we contrast that with Bank, for example, you see a much more clearly defined peak of usage for those commuting hours. And you can see down the bottom here, for example, at sort of around 8 o'clock, 80% of all usage is people arriving at the station. It's their destination. They're going to work versus the evening when it's all about people departing. They're entering the station and going on to their sort of probably off to home or out for a drink if it was in the later evening. What we can also do on an individual station basis and hour by hour basis is also understand the volumes by all of our different demographic variables. And so what we're looking at here is Bank and Monument at 8 in the morning. But what we're actually doing is indexing this against the rest of the UK because as a sales organisation, what we need to do is show how we're over-delivering against certain audiences. So what we can see for Bank and Monument, there's a slight bias towards men. It's quite a young audience, which is actually reflective of the underground audience as a whole. But this is particularly so we can see 25 to 39-year-olds particularly overrepresented. They're highly affluent, as you would probably expect from a city-based station. And also they're very sophisticated in terms of their usage of their mobile device. And this now is really where it gets interesting for me. So this is now moving away just about movement and demographic, but looking at actual behaviours. What are people using their devices for? Now, what we're not doing is looking at what people are using their devices for at this particular location. This is about what they're using their device for during the entirety of their daily lives. So again, I'm going to compare two stations. We're looking at Bank and Monument here. And what we've done is we've split down into 10 categories and 30 subcategories, behaviours based on app and web usage. And what we can see here, unsurprisingly, is that finance shows through quite dramatically. So we're looking at, people are looking at information sources, they're looking at investments, insurance, and so on and so forth. Also, interestingly, they're looking at food. So we've already established they're an affluent audience. They're interested in going out and booking tables at, restaurants. If we contrast that with Knightsbridge, for example, we can see a completely different pattern. It's all about beauty. It's about tourist attractions. It's about travel. So it's a very, very different profile that we're seeing. And again, for us, this is really important to be able to put this across as a story to our clients in terms of being able to target based on interest. The next chart is quite a complicated chart to explain, but this is all about mission. Why are people actually, what is the purpose of people's travel when they're getting to these particular stations? So again, looking at Knightsbridge, if we sort of move across from left to right, we're looking at visit to visit. So they've travelled from a non-work or non-home location to another non-work and non-home location, suggesting it's a leisure activity. It could be tourists, for example. The next biggest block is commuting to work. Then visit from home, commute back home, home from visit, and so on and so forth. And what we can then do is subdivide that down based on spending power. So if we look at visit to visit, our next biggest block is highest affluence, so they're highly affluent. And then when can we find them? Well, we're finding them in the afternoon. We're finding them at 5, 6 o'clock, 2 in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon, etc. Again, contrasting that with bank, it's all about commuting. It's all about commuting to work, commuting back home. Again, our biggest block underneath that is our highest affluent demographic. But we're seeing them at different times of the day as we were seeing at Knightsbridge. We're seeing them early in the morning, because again, it's this commute. We then want to move in terms of geography. So this is really important for us because, there's a perception when you're talking about the London Underground that it is just about London. Actually, no, it's not. So what we can see here for Bank and Monument is, in fact, a third of people using this particular station live outside of London. And what we can then start to do is understand exactly where they live in terms of not only London itself but beyond. And that's important for us in terms of telling a story to businesses who perhaps don't operate in London but still want to communicate effectively with their customers, and also when we're trying to sell against other national media. Again, if we contrast this with Knightsbridge, you see a completely different pattern. So what we can see here, affluent pockets of North London and South London, but also interestingly you're seeing sort of very affluent Kent, Sevenoaks, Royal Tunbridge Wells, and also the kind of stockbroker belt to the southwest. Again, it's all about the journey, so we want to understand where these journeys begin. We're looking at Knightsbridge here, and what we can see, we've already established it's visit to visit, it's kind of tourist and leisure, and we can see most journeys that end in Knightsbridge begin at Leicester Square. So again, it's on the Piccadilly line, but also I think it shows that there's a real tourist element to this. But also importantly, what we can start to understand is how these outer zone stations are feeding Knightsbridge. And again, if we start to define our audience in terms of demograph and behaviour, we can bring all of this together to understand how stations operate in combination. The last slide I wanted to show you, and that's sort of something we didn't talk about, is actually looking at foreign visitors to the UK. And I think one thing makes me very proud. London is a truly international city. We can really understand where our foreign visitors are coming from. And so again, we're looking at Knightsbridge in August. It's interesting, we see Western Europe represented very, very highly. We've got Italy, we've got Germany, we've got Spain and France. But I think it's also fascinating that suddenly we see places like Saudi Arabia, China, the United Arab Emirates coming up. And I suspect that they're probably going to rather a large, or 2 large stores that probably are in Knightsbridge, would be my suspicion. So I hope that gave you a bit of an overview in terms of how we're using this type of data. I think it is big data. Big data is a term, I think we know it's a bit of a hackneyed term in a way, but it's about generating the value from that data. How can we access it in a visual manner that allows us to build cogent commercial cases?
We will move to the questions after, during the lunch, because we are really
Sure,
really
sorry.
So guys, take a look at them, find them during lunch. A lot of questions,
Yeah, sorry for the overrun there, but
no worries.
if you want to chat to us about any of the conclusions we draw here, then please do so.
Yeah, okay. It's fine. So just very, very quickly, sorry, just wanted to say, big data is an enabler for us. What this is about from an out-of-home perspective is we're a £1 billion market. What we want to do, we bump along at sort of average growth of about 2% a year. What we're about is trying to attract new money into our media. So having this kind of information is absolutely critical for us to allow us to do that. Do you want to talk a little bit?
I'll happily cover anything off with anyone who wants to speak.
Okay,
later.
thank you.
Thank
Sorry
you.
for overrunning.